I'm Gloria Weston, 73 years old, and this year on my birthday, I sat at the kitchen table with a cake I'd bought for myself and a silence I couldn't explain. Not a single call. No card, not even a knock from a neighbor. Just one photo of my son and his family smiling under the Eiffel Tower. The message underneath said, "Hope you don't mind. Mom France has been a dream. We'll call when we're back." They never did, and the cake went untouched. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments if you've ever sat in a room full of memories and realized not one person thought to check if you were okay and hit that like button. If quiet strength has ever been your only answer. I was born in 1951 in a small town in Illinois where we were raised to mind our manners, speak when spoken to, and always help a neighbor in need. My parents taught me that a home wasn't made of walls, but of care and consistency. My mother canned peaches every summer. My father fixed shoes at the shop until his hands gave out, and every Sunday afternoon we visited my grandma, who believed nothing bad could happen if there was warm bread on the table. I married young to Henry Weston, the steady type who knew how to fix a sink and made the best pancakes on Saturday mornings. We raised one son, Mark, in the same house we built together, brick by brick, with every tax return, every late-night worry, every small celebration tucked into its corners. Our life wasn't grand, but it was solid. Henry worked for the rail company, and I took shifts at the library. I made sure there was always enough food, enough warmth, enough love. And when Henry passed 12 years ago, I stayed in the house with the same hydrangeas out front and the same porch swing we'd bought when Mark turned 10. By then, Mark had his own family, a wife, Tanya, and 2 children. I doted on every visit they made, felt shorter than the last. But I didn't complain when they asked for help with tuition or braces or summer camp. I gave it gladly because that's what mothers do. About a month before my birthday, Mark and Tanya stopped by with pastries and wide smiles. Tanya poured tea, complimented the drapes like she hadn't once called them old-fashioned, then slid a folder across the table. She said it was just a little travel clause to help book their anniversary trip under the family fund. Something about tax reasons, something simple. I hesitated, but Mark nodded and said, "We figured you'd like knowing you helped." I signed it the way you signed dozens of small things over the years, never thinking they'd be used against you. A few days later, I couldn't access my online bank account. I tried twice. Then again that evening, locked out, I called Mark. He said it was temporary, that Tanya was consolidating something for the trip, and not to worry. I didn't push. I'd always believed giving space was part of love. But that night, I stared at the closed laptop and felt something shift. They didn't just forget my birthday. They used it as the final excuse to leave me behind the morning of my birthday. The house was too still. I had strung up a few streamers the night before, thinking maybe someone might stop by. I wore my nicest cardigan and lit a candle, even though it was only me. The photo they sent from France was bright and smiling. The kind of joy you assume means everything is fine until you remember what it cost you. It was after the cake had gone back into the fridge untouched that I reached for the envelope in the drawer, the one with my pension stubs and account numbers. My fingers didn't shake. Then they stiffened instead. There had been too many small signs brushed aside as stress or forgetfulness, and now I saw them clearly. The rush to sign papers, the way Tanya smiled too much, the way Mark didn't look me in the eye anymore. I pushed the birthday banner into the trash, quietly folded each streamer, and laid them to rest, with the same care I used to wrap Mark's school lunches. They thought I was too old, too soft, too trusting to notice what they'd taken. But they were wrong. What they didn't know was that quiet doesn't mean weak, and they were about to find out what silence looks like when it starts to move. The sound of the clock in the kitchen was the only thing moving that morning. It ticked steady and slow as I opened the cabinet drawer and pulled out the folder Tanya had handed me weeks earlier, the one she'd called a small permission slip. I hadn't looked at it since the day I signed it. I had trusted her, trusted Mark. I sat down at the table, smoothing the corners of the folder, like it was something fragile. The air around me felt still, like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. The papers inside weren't many, but the language wrapped around itself in ways meant to confuse. The word authorization showed up more than once. Then, custodial access and estate management, and down near the bottom, one line buried in fine print that took the breath from my lungs: full discretionary control granted for the duration of travel and all subsequent estate adjustments. My name was there in print above a signature that was mine. It was my writing, but it hadn't meant what they said it did. I hadn't understood. And now I was starting to. I tried again to log into my bank account. Still locked. I went to the website for the county recorder's office and fumbled through menus until I found what I was looking for. I typed in my address and waited. The screen loaded, and then there it was, deed holder Tanya Seafields. My hand didn't shake. Not then. I just stared. That was my name that should have been there. Mine and Henry's. I clicked the link for the document and scrolled down. It listed a transfer marked executed by power of attorney. I didn't remember signing anything like that. And yet there was my name again, scrawled in wide loops I hadn't used in years. Too perfect, too round, like someone had tried to make it look grandmotherly. The house Henry and I built our life in, where I raised Mark, where I sat beside Henry as he died, was no longer mine. The kitchen still had the same cabinets, the mantel still held our wedding photo, but on paper it belonged to someone else now. Not a stranger, but someone who had smiled at me over tea and called me Mom. I didn't cry. I turned off the computer and stood slowly. I took the birthday banner from the trash can and tucked it into the drawer beneath the sink. Then I reached for my coat. The community center still smelled like wax and folding chairs. It had been years since I walked those halls, but nothing had changed. The same bulletin board with curling flyers, the same linoleum tile with one cracked corner. In the far corner near the window, May sat with a peppermint tea and a crossword puzzle in her lap. Her silver hair was pinned just the same as it had been when we organized block parties together back in the 80s. She looked up as I approached, then folded the newspaper in half. "Well, Gloria Weston," she said, her voice calm and low. "What took you so long? I didn't sit right away." I pulled the county printout from my purse and placed it on the table between us. "I think they took my house." May didn't blink. She reached for the paper and read it once, then again. "Let me guess," she said. "Something called a gift clause, travel-related?" I nodded. "They buried it under a custodial form," I said. I didn't know what I was signing. She clicked her tongue. "Classic. They count on that." She reached for her bag and pulled out a pen and a napkin. "You're going to go down to the county office. Ask for Sylvia, not Pam. Sylvia's sharp. Pam will call Tanya before you've even stepped back outside." She paused, looked me in the eye. "They think you're quiet. They're not wrong. But they forgot. Quiet doesn't mean soft." I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until I let it out. We sat there a long while, mapping out names and steps, things to say and not say. When I finally stood to leave, May said one more thing. "Bake the cookies if you want to, but make sure the oven's off when they come looking." The next morning, I wore my nicest coat. I waited at the county building behind a woman with a baby and a man arguing about parking fees. When it was my turn, I asked to see the most recent deed for my address. Sylvia didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. She printed the file, then paused before sliding it toward me. "You used to be on the church board, right? With Pastor Jim?" I nodded. "I remember," she said. "You don't miss much." She tapped the page. "Tanya Seafields, Executed through power of attorney, 3 weeks ago. Her voice was quiet, but clear. I studied the signature. It looked like mine, but it wasn't. Not the way I write my G's. Not the way my hand curves down when I'm tired. Can this be reversed? Maybe, she said, if you can show coercion or misunderstanding. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. I opened my phone and showed her the photo Tanya had sent me the day she filed it, a photo of the form with a winking emoji and the words "almost done." Sylvia's eyes narrowed. That's not how you file a power of attorney, she said. That's misrepresentation. She reached under the desk and slipped me a form. If someone were planning to contest a deed, this is the one they'd need. I thanked her quietly and turned to leave. Miss Weston, she said, just above a whisper. Don't wait too long. I walked home through the cold with the form folded neatly in my coat pocket. The house I passed wasn't mine anymore, not legally. But I still knew every creak in the porch steps, every mark on the window glass where Henry had fixed it wrong the first time. They thought they'd taken it, but they hadn't taken me. That afternoon, I stopped by the cafe on 4th and Juniper. A quiet place with real mugs and ceiling fans that hummed just enough to fill the silence. I ordered a peppermint tea and sat by the window, pulled out the legal form, and started reading. 2 booths behind me, I heard laughter. Familiar, bright. Then a voice I recognized. Tanya. She was laughing with someone carefree. She still thinks the house is hers, she said loud enough to carry. We've got the keys. Mark's already planning the sale. I didn't turn around. I just folded the paper slowly and slid it into my purse. That night, a letter arrived. No return address. Just a statement a placement had been confirmed for assisted living. No consultation. No warning. Just a date and a plan. I sat with it in the same chair where Henry used to read the newspaper. I read the letter twice. Then I picked up the phone. May answered on the second ring. Walter showed up that evening just after dinner, carrying a manila folder under his arm and wearing that same old corduroy jacket I remembered from church council meetings. His knock was quiet but steady. When I opened the door, he gave me a look that didn't ask questions, it simply waited for my answer. I stepped aside and let him in. He laid the folder on the kitchen table, the same table where I used to pack Mark's lunches and help the kids with crafts when they were little. May had called him. She hadn't needed to explain much. Just the letter, the forged documents, the deed transfer. He already knew the kind of mess I was facing. It wasn't his first. Walter pulled out several documents and spread them out carefully. They're using an old guardianship clause, he said. It's just enough to confuse people, but not enough to hold up under scrutiny. But if we don't act now, it'll become harder to undo. He tapped the top form. This revokes everything. Power of attorney, medical proxy, deed authority, all of it. I read each page slowly this time. Not skimming, not assuming. I signed with the pen he handed me. My hand moved steadily across the lines. By the time we were done, it was nearly dark out. Walter gathered everything back into the folder, clipped it shut, and nodded once. You're protected now, but I'd get out of the house if I were you. I already knew where I'd go. May was waiting with fresh sheets and a lamp lit in the guest room. She didn't ask how it went. She just handed me a glass of water and said, You're not hiding. You're positioning. The room smelled faintly of cedar and something warm like chamomile. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. Over the next few days, the rhythm of our plan settled in. Walter handled the fraud claims and hand-delivered the forms to the county office. May notarized each statement with practiced care, her signature steady in the lower right corner of every page. I called James Diacroix, Henry's old lawyer, the same man who had helped us draft our will 25 years earlier. It had been a while since we spoke, but he picked up on the second ring. "Gloria," he said, calm and clear. "I thought I might hear from you again someday." We didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told him everything: how the document had been disguised, how the house had been transferred without my consent, how the bank account had been locked. I told him about the assisted living letter, about Tanya's voice in the cafe laughing like none of it would ever catch up to her. He listened the way only certain men do, quietly, fully, without the need to interrupt. When I finished, there was a pause. Then he said, "We're going to unwind every inch of it, quietly, completely." That same afternoon, he emailed a new power of attorney form, one that placed all authority back in my hands. May notarized it in the kitchen while a lemon loaf cooled on the counter. A courier picked up the packet 2 hours later. We updated the will, filed an affidavit of capacity from my doctor. May drove me to the clinic herself. The exam didn't take long. "She's not confused," the physician said, flipping through my file. "She's furious. There's a difference." By Friday, James had all the pieces. The fraud claim had been filed. The deed was officially contested. My pension account untouched, but previously inaccessible was restored. The passwords were changed. The secondary access revoked. Every path they had built into my life was sealed off. James called that evening. "You're safe," he said. "Everything's been time-stamped. If they try to fight you on this, they lose. If they try to retaliate, they incriminate themselves." I sat with that for a moment. I didn't feel victorious. I felt still. Then he asked, "Do you want to press charges?" I didn't answer right away. "Not yet," I said finally, because it wasn't about charges. It was about understanding. And I wasn't done watching them come to terms with what they'd tried to take. A few days later, I signed a lease for a cottage 2 blocks away. It was small, just 2 rooms and a porch. But the moment I saw the ivy curling up the side of the doorframe, I knew it was right. The landlord, a quiet man named Hank, looked me over once and said, "You look like someone who pays on time." I told him I did. He handed me the keys. I moved out without fanfare. Just a suitcase, a box of books, Henry's old flannel, and a few framed pictures. May helped me carry the heavier things. We set up a little toaster, a folding table near the window, and hung a wind chime from the porch beam. I unpacked Mark's kindergarten clay bowl and set it on the windowsill. The photo of us from his 10th birthday stayed in the drawer by my bed. The rest, I left behind. James kept everything moving behind the scenes. He refiled the will, updated the credit union, sent notices to every institution Tanya had touched. When the last document was processed, I sat on the porch of the cottage and watched the afternoon light change color across the grass. They were still overseas, still posting photos of poolside champagne and rooftop cafes, still tagging themselves in places I couldn't pronounce, smiling like everything was perfectly planned. That was fine, because while they posed for cameras, I was building something that would last longer than a vacation. I had my name back, I had my voice back, and soon I'd have the house legally, publicly, undeniably. The real estate office was just off Main Street, tucked between a framing shop and a storefront church. I hadn't been inside in years, not since Henry and I helped our neighbor sell her ranch-style place down on Maple. The woman behind the desk introduced herself as Nicole. She looked to be in her 40s, hair pulled back, blazer-pressed, no-nonsense expression. She offered me water. I shook my head and handed her the sealed envelope James had prepared. She opened it, skimmed the contents, and looked up. "You've already done the hard part," she said. "This is just the finish line." I nodded. That morning, the final deed reversal had been stamped and filed. Tanya's forged authority had been nullified, every fraudulent form struck from the record. And with the house now legally back in my name, there was nothing left tying me to the address on Forest Hill Road, but a set of front steps I could still see in my sleep. Nicole didn't ask many questions. She didn't need to. James had handled everything cleanly. What I needed from her was simple list the house and list it quickly. It's a desirable area, she said, already typing. That front porch alone will get offers. The photos were taken the next day. I stayed away while they staged the rooms, boxed up what was left of Mark and Tanya's things, and opened the curtains wide to let in the afternoon sun. The agent said it would move fast. She was right. 4 offers came in within 24 hours. All cash, all over asking. I didn't pick the highest bidder. I chose the one who sent a letter, a man named Daniel, a single father with 2 daughters, who said he'd always wanted a home with a lemon tree out front and a quiet room for his girls to do their homework. That was enough for me. While the sale was processing, I stayed quiet. Every utility was transferred, every login updated. Not a trace of their names remained on any document. James filed the last piece of paperwork, a notice that the property was being sold cleanly and without contest. Meanwhile, Mark and Tanya continued posting pictures from Europe. Tanya in a silk robe near a rooftop pool. Mark with a wine glass raised the Eiffel Tower behind him. The kids in matching shirts that said Paris Squad. They hadn't called. Not once. No mention of how the transition was going. No questions about how I was managing. They hadn't checked the deed. That much was clear. Back at the cottage, I spent the mornings organizing receipts, labeling files. In the afternoons, May would stop by with a crossword or a bundle of fresh herbs from her garden. We kept things simple. Tea on the porch, a few rounds of checkers. On Thursdays, I went to the senior center to drop off donated books. The quiet had weight, but not the kind that pressed down. It filled the space gently. One afternoon, James called to say the sale had closed. "The check is en route," he said. "You did it." I didn't answer right away. I just looked out the window, toward the house. I no longer called mine. That evening, Nicole dropped off the key in a plain envelope. Inside was a thank you note from Daniel and a photo the movers had found up in the attic. A dusty box, half-labeled Gloria Keep. Inside, my wedding veil, a clay ornament Mark made in kindergarten, and an old Polaroid of me in the backyard, arms covered in flowers smiling wide. They must have missed the box when they cleared the attic. Tanya had turned that space into a meditation room. Funny how one photo could make everything feel real again. Not sad, just rooted. I walked over to the house one last time that Friday. Let myself in with the spare key, opened the windows, let the wind move through the rooms. The living room echoed a little without the furniture. The kitchen still smelled faintly of lemon oil. I ran my hand along the edge of the counter where Henry used to sit with his morning coffee. There were no speeches, no tears. Just one last moment in a space that had held every version of my life. I closed the windows, locked the front door, slipped the key into the envelope for the new owner, and walked away. By the time their plane landed, I was already across the street at May's, sitting in her sunroom, tea in hand. We could see the driveway from her window. At exactly 4:12 p.m., the Uber pulled up. Mark stepped out first, sunglasses on suitcase rolling behind him. Tanya followed, talking fast, her phone in one hand, purse slung over her shoulder. The kids spilled out next, tired and cranky. They looked rested, tan, like people coming home to something they believed was still theirs. Tanya reached into her bag, pulled out her key, and walked up to the front door. She tried the lock, then tried again. It didn't budge. She knocked, waited, knocked again, harder. Mark stepped forward, tried his own key. Nothing. He looked confused at first, then irritated. Tanya said something sharp. He pulled out his phone. May sipped her tea without comment. I didn't move. Tanya turned toward the sidewalk, her voice rising. The porch light was out. The flower boxes gone. The lawn hadn't been trimmed in weeks. She looked around like she didn't recognize the place. Mark paced the walkway, phone pressed to his ear. I imagined James's voicemail greeting calm and firm, explaining the change in property status. Then I saw Tanya's face fall. She dropped her bag and sat hard on the steps. Her shoulders started shaking. Mark said something I couldn't hear. She snapped back, pushed him, then stood and walked away, waving down the Uber that was still idling at the curb. She climbed in alone. Mark stayed on the porch for a while, just sat there, hands folded, eyes low. The kids didn't ask questions. They stayed near the sidewalk, silent. Across the street, May set her cup down. "Ready for what comes next?" she asked. I nodded. "I am." The first call came that evening, just after the sun dipped behind the roofline. I watched the phone light up from across the room. Mark's name on the screen, followed by a second call, then a third. I didn't pick up. I left the phone where it sat on the side table and walked into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and let the water heat while May flipped through the local paper at the dining room table. Then the messages started. At first, they were quiet, unsure. "Mom, this isn't what it looks like. Tanya didn't tell me everything. Please, just call me back." They came in clusters, each one a little more frantic than the last. "We can fix this." I didn't know the house was being sold. I thought it was just temporary. I didn't answer. By morning, the tone had shifted. "You're being unfair. This was never meant to hurt you. We were protecting you. You weren't thinking clearly." That one made me pause. The phrasing was almost clinical, like they were still trying to build a case even in the middle of their apology. I turned the phone off and placed it in the drawer. May slid a coaster across the table and handed me a cup of tea. By the third day, the silence had grown thick. The messages stopped. The calls dried up. Even Tanya's social media had gone quiet. James called to check in. "They're holed up at a motel off Route 7, he said. No sign they've made any moves legally." Tanya's spinning. Mark hasn't said much. May and I drove past the place once, slow and unnoticed. The neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly in the afternoon haze. Tanya sat on the curb near the office phone to her ear, a sweatshirt pulled tight over her knees. Mark stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who hadn't figured out what to say yet. They didn't see us. We turned the corner and kept going. That night, I went through my files one more time, confirmed the pension had been transferred into a protected annuity, reviewed the credit card closures. Every joint account had been dissolved, every emergency fund separated and secured. Even the grocery card Tanya used for family errands had been canceled. They had nothing to lean on anymore. Back at the cottage, the routines continued. May trimmed her rosemary bush. I swept the porch and arranged the flower pots in the corner to catch the morning sun. A few neighbors had started waving again. Some remembered me from years back. I didn't bring up what happened, and no one asked. The quiet was different now. It didn't ache. It settled. James called again a few days later. "They're stalling," he said. "Waiting to see if you'll reach out. Trying to figure out if they can negotiate." "They can't," I said. He agreed. "But they're used to waiting you out." I glanced across the table. May was teaching me how to knit a simple dishcloth. The thread looped gently through my fingers. "Let them wait," I said. The motel extended their stay twice. Tanya started using an old social media account again, posting vague quotes about betrayal and loyalty. Mark appeared in one photo standing by the vending machines in a wrinkled t-shirt, looking down at his shoes. There were no more messages, no more calls. Then one afternoon, as I was repotting a mint plant on the windowsill, May looked up from her seat by the door. "They're back." I stepped outside, drying my hands on a towel. From the porch, I could see them through the hedges. A rental SUV parked in front of the old house. The children were in the back seat, pressed up against the windows, too quiet for bickering. Tanya sat stiff in the passenger seat, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. Mark stood by the mailbox holding something in his hands. It was a photo. Even from a distance, I recognized it, the two of us on his 10th birthday, sitting by the pool with melting ice cream cones. He had given it to me that year in a card that said, "To the best mom ever." I hadn't seen it in decades. He looked at it for a long time. Then, without saying anything, he walked up the front steps and tucked the photo under the flower pot on the porch, the same one I used to fill with begonias every spring. He didn't knock, didn't try the door. Just stood there a moment longer, glanced back at the windows, and walked slowly back to the car. Tanya didn't get out. The kids didn't ask questions. They pulled away without a word. Back inside, I rinsed the dirt from my hands and folded the towel neatly beside the sink. May stood by the window for another minute, then turned toward me. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm better than okay." The photo stayed where he left it, tucked beneath the flower pot on the porch that didn't belong to them anymore. The next morning, after their rental car had pulled away for good, I crossed the street and retrieved it. The corners were curled a little from the sun, but the image was clear. Mark, 10 years old, hair stuck to his forehead from the heat, and me beside him with a paper plate balanced on my knee, both of us grinning at something just out of frame. I took it home and slid it into the top drawer of my desk. I didn't frame it. I didn't throw it out either. May and I spent the afternoon tidying up her backyard. She clipped herbs for drying, and I pulled weeds from the planters by the fence. The rhythm of normal days returned quietly. No more calls, no more explanations, just a stretch of clear space between what had happened and what I wanted to do next. The new owners of the house had already moved in. Daniel, the single father who'd written the letter, came by once to thank me in person. He brought his 2 daughters with him, both polite and shy, the younger one holding a jar of cookies wrapped in red cellophane. "We already love the kitchen," he said. "Sunlight hits just right in the morning." I nodded, told him I used to sit by the window with Henry, listening to the radio while we ate toast. He smiled. "That's exactly what we've been doing." I wished them well, then watched from the sidewalk as they carried in groceries and hung wind chimes from the porch beam. The cottage had started to feel more like mine. I rearranged the living room, put Henry's old flannel on the back of the reading chair, and sorted through the last of the boxes I'd moved from May's. I didn't keep everything. Some things didn't need to come forward with me. Later that week, James stopped by to drop off the final bank confirmation forms. Everything was now under my sole control. No co-signers, no backup custodians. He reviewed the last few pages with a pen in one hand and his reading glasses low on his nose. When we finished, he sat back in the chair and looked around the room. "You've done more than most people could manage," he said. They thought they had the upper hand. I folded the papers and placed them neatly in the drawer. "They had a head start," I said. "That's all." The pension had been moved into a private annuity. A new account had been opened with only my name. The emergency fund had been restored with a portion set aside for future medical needs. I even went to the DMV and updated my contact information just to be sure no stray paperwork landed where it shouldn't. It wasn't about fear. It was about not having to look over my shoulder. May and I started attending a Wednesday morning group at the senior center. Nothing formal, just puzzles, coffee, and quiet conversation. Some days I brought cookies. Some days May brought copies of old word games she clipped from the paper. It felt good to be among people who didn't ask for anything. One evening, just as I finished watering the rosemary by the porch steps, I spotted a letter tucked into the corner of the mailbox. No return address, just my name in block letters across the front. Inside was a folded page. Short. No greeting. "We're sorry. We didn't know how far things had gone. Tanya never explained the paperwork. We thought you were being taken care of, not pushed out. If there's a path forward, we'd like to find it. Love, Mark." I reread it once, then folded it again and slid it back into the envelope. I placed it in the same desk drawer where the photo now lived. I didn't respond. May made soup that night. We ate in the kitchen, the windows cracked just enough to let in the evening air. She didn't mention the letter. Neither did I. That weekend, I donated the last of the clothes I no longer wore. I boxed up some books for the library's sale table and dropped off a few extra towels at the animal shelter. Each errand gave the day shape, each small task, a reminder that I was building something simple, steady mine. I hadn't heard from Tanya directly. Not a text, not a voicemail. But James mentioned she'd tried to access one of the closed accounts and had been declined. He handled it. Quietly. She wouldn't be trying again. As the days passed, I began sleeping with the window open. I started keeping a pitcher of water near the door for the delivery folks. I bought a small radio from the thrift store and left it on low in the kitchen, just enough to hum through the mornings. No one asked when the house had been sold. No one from their side called to argue. It was as if a curtain had dropped. No more performance. No more pretending. They had made their move, and I had made mine. The second letter came folded into an envelope that looked just like the first. No stamp, no return address, just my name, printed neatly on the front. I found it on the porch one morning, tucked halfway under the doorframe. Inside, the message was short. Would you meet us? Just once. We won't bring the kids. We just want to talk. Please. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature. I recognized the spacing in the handwriting, the way the lowercase t's were always crossed too high. I placed the letter beside the first and closed the drawer. That same afternoon, I went down to the library and dropped off 2 more boxes of books. On the way back, I stopped by the pharmacy, picked up a refill for May, and waved to the clerk who'd worked there since Henry's last hospital stay. Everything in town was as it had always been, small, steady, familiar. At dinner, May stirred soup on the stove and didn't mention the envelope. She never asked what I planned to do. She didn't need to. We ate in silence, the soft clink of spoons against ceramic bowls filling the kitchen. Later that evening, I pulled the curtain shut and turned off the porch light. They didn't leave a third letter. Instead, the request came through James. He called on a Tuesday just after 10. They asked me to pass along a message, he said. They want to meet at the cafe on Juniper. This Saturday. Noon. I let the silence stretch. James cleared his throat gently. You're under no obligation. I know, I said. He waited. Would you like me to respond? Yes, I said. Tell them I won't be coming. I hung up the phone and opened the back door to let the breeze in. The rosemary plant had started to flower along the steps. I sat for a while, just listening to the leaves shift in the wind. Saturday came and went. I walked to the post office that morning, mailed a birthday card to my neighbor's grandson, and picked up a small bag of flour for baking. May and I spent the afternoon going over old recipes. We found Henry's chili notes scribbled on the back of a grocery list. I made a copy and tucked the original in the drawer with the photo and the letters. That evening, James called again. They waited an hour, he said, then left without saying anything. I thanked him and hung up. The next week passed quietly. No more letters, no more calls. Just the usual rhythm laundry on Tuesday, crossword club on Wednesday, a walk through the park near the old elementary school on Thursday. The routines helped, not because they filled space, but because they reminded me that I didn't owe anyone the version of me they had expected. On Friday, a large envelope arrived from the county office. Inside were copies of the finalized documents, deed transfer confirmation, updated will registration, and a clean record of every revoked authority form. I flipped through each page, slowly signing the final acknowledgement and filing it neatly in the cabinet James had helped me set up. Later that night, I pulled the rocker a little closer to the front window and sat with a cup of peppermint tea. The street outside was quiet. A single porch light flickered across the road. May joined me a few minutes later. She didn't speak, just handed me a folded dish towel she'd finished stitching. "You didn't answer them," she said finally. "No," I said. "I didn't." She nodded as if that was all she needed to know. "They're not used to silence," she said. "They'll have to learn." The phone hadn't rung in days. Even the voicemails had stopped. The stillness wasn't heavy now. It had changed. It had become mine. They left town the same way they arrived, quietly, without knocking. I saw them from the kitchen window, two silhouettes, stepping into a silver SUV parked across the street. Michaela carried a small tote bag. Darren walked behind her slower than usual, head down. They didn't look back at the house. The engine started, turned left at the stop sign, and disappeared past the elm trees. May was stirring sauce on the stove. She didn't glance up, but her voice was steady when she asked, "Was that them?" I nodded. "They're gone." For a long moment, the only sound was the slow bubbling from the pot. Then May wiped her hands on a dish towel and said, "Then that's that." We ate dinner at the table by the window, the same way we had when Henry was still with us. Afterward, we washed the dishes in quiet rhythm, her rinsing, me drying, and then we sat in the front room with the radio playing low. I didn't expect anything else from them. No apology, no letter, no offer to make things right. But that silence didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a closed door, one I didn't have to open again. James stopped by a few days later, carrying a sack of apples from his orchard and a manila folder under his arm. He placed the folder gently on the kitchen table. "Final filings," he said. "Your name's the only one on anything now. House accounts, pension, all clear." I signed where he pointed, then poured us each a glass of tea. He didn't mention Darren or Michaela. Neither did I. That spring, May planted herbs in the raised bed Henry built years ago. I hung a new wind chime by the porch steps. On Saturdays, I started reading aloud to the younger kids at the library, a group that grew bigger each week, even when the weather turned warm and the lake started calling. There were moments when I'd pass the old photo wall in the hallway and pause. Not because I missed what we'd lost, but because I finally understood the truth of it. Love that's forced is not love. Family, when it's honest, doesn't need to be begged for. They thought I would fold. That I'd hand over the house, the savings, the name Henry and I spent decades building. But what I handed them instead was something they never expected: silent strength and a life still full without them in it. We all get tested, sometimes by people we raised ourselves. But peace doesn't come from getting even. It comes from knowing you didn't let bitterness take root. Now when I sit on the porch with a quilt on my knees and May humming softly beside me, I know we're exactly where we're meant to be. Not because it was easy, but because we chose to stay whole. If this story found you in a hard season, I hope it reminded you that quiet strength is still strength, and walking away can sometimes be the most loving thing you do for yourself. Thank you for listening. If it spoke to you, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if you haven't yet, feel free to subscribe. I'll be here sharing more when you're ready.